All right, welcome everybody. This is our first crack at doing a podcast together. My name is Van,
I'm Brian.
and we're just, I don't know, two dads trying to figure out the world. So, Brian, what do you want to talk about today?
I think today's topic that'd be kind of interesting to get into. I'd like to talk about traveling with kids, specifically air travel, so international travel. I know that you had recently taken your kids to Vietnam. I plan to take my kids to Mexico not too long from now. So kind of your experiences with littles, two under two, and then we'll kind of talk about I've taken my kids a couple times and how does that develop and tips and tricks as travel changes.
Tips and tricks. Do you wanna go over kind of questions you have in terms of what you're thinking? Have you ever done an international travel? I mean, Mexico is just outside the States, so
I've never done a like continent to continent change with my kids. I have independently, but I've never done a really long, anything more than 6 hour flight with my children. So, um,
have
in
you are you taking all
Mexico,
three kids to Mexico?
yeah, yeah. I take every other year. I take the whole family and we go to Mexico. So this time it'll be actually a lot of people. It's going to be my entire family, including my mother and my aunt, and then several of my wife's family will also be there, like my in-laws, couples, stuff, my brother, sister-in-law,
Okay.
a couple guys from my gym. So a lot of people this time, but um, yeah, we've done it a handful of times, but never anything where we got to cross, you know, an ocean like you did.
Okay. So you've done the trip before, it sounds like
Yeah, I've done it. I've done it a couple of
a
times.
couple of times.
So.
I'm just thinking about some tips, and I think it's pretty fresh still in terms of thinking about tips. I think what really helped a lot was us coming back, and um a friend came with us to meet in Vietnam. So he came back with us with the return trip, and he was able to kind of carry bags and help push strollers and stuff like that. And so, if I was gonna give any tip, it would be bring more people to help that are single or have other things to kind of push around in terms of like bags and stuff like that. But ooh, it's still a pretty fresh topic. It's pretty it was a rough time, that was for sure. I think um I went into it not knowing how bad it was gonna be. Um and I mean you were saying I got 202. So when I left for Vietnam it was September, middle end of September. Um my little girl was uh 3.5 months. Wow, that sounds like she was really young. Just remembering back. Um, and then my son was 2 months away from turning two. So when we came back, he just turned two. So we I mean we tried to prepare as much as we could. I mean, we have this big double stroller that we bought probably a month or so before we left, and not knowing that we were going to leave. So that stroller is probably like 40 to 50 pounds. So we left that at home. So we bought like that uh little uh, Costco stroller.
Like the little umbrella ones that just kind
Yeah.
of fold out,
Yeah,
super
we got
light.
that one for him. And then we had one that laid down for Cammy. Um, but that one that laid down was probably still like 15, 20 pounds. So that one was still pretty heavy. So yeah, definitely bring strollers. I think it helped on the way to the gate. Excuse me. The thing that was really hard is we brought a lot of luggage. Most of it was um gifts
Because
and
you
stuff.
went for quite some time too, so this wasn't
Yeah,
a short jaunt for you.
yeah.
Where I pack one bag because we're gone for 7 days. You were gone for
We were gone for 2 months. So we probably like I probably overpacked a little bit, but we there's um two check-in luggages per person. So the little kids also had two, so we fully utilized all check-in. So we checked in six bags. Um,
How many
most of it,
carry-ons?
how many carry-ons we had? Probably like four or five. We probably had like a backpack, and then you get like a regular carry-on. Um,
So you're looking at like 11 pieces of luggage plus two strollers.
yes. Um,
And
so
one stroller
the
you can put
carry-on,
stuff on. Yeah. But one stuff like stroller is like just for a kid. There's
yeah,
no,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. The carry-ons were the worst of it. Like when you check in your bags, they're done with, and then you get them back in your destination. So those six check-ins weren't really that big of a deal. The carry-ons were the struggle. So uh, I think you kind of have to test drive how it would be when you're pushing strollers to the gate and like, oh, you have, I don't know, a duffel bag on your hip, a backpack on your back, maybe a wheelie thing too. Um, so kind of visualize how that is, like maybe get the best kind of carry on for you. Like, is a bigger backpack better, or one of the same kind of style? I think we maybe had too many style carry-ons. Um, and then the worst of it was when they took the strollers. They took the strollers before we boarded, which I didn't know that they were gonna do. So I thought we were gonna have the strollers up until the gate, or not the gate, the entrance to the plane, where we could push the strollers with our carry, because we had a carry on us on the stroller. So what happened was they just like, oh, we have to take the strollers now. I was like, oh, okay. So we had to get like a carry on from underneath the stroller, and then put, like, I was carrying probably like four or five carry-ons just on my person. And um my son is at the age where he either needs to watch Cocomelon or be in a stroller strapped in or run. Exactly. Um so at that point he was trying to run. So I needed to restrain him because I couldn't run around with him with three. I was probably over exaggerating. I probably had three carry-ons on my person, and him in my arms. Um, and when I was restraining him, he was screaming too. So, and he was trying to get out at with all his might. So, um, getting on the plane and getting in the seat, that was one of the hardest things I probably ever had to do. And then I've had the trip several times without the kids. And I never felt as I felt when I got there. I'd I'd never had this feeling where I was just gonna just drop to the floor and just faint. Uh, when I got out of the door of the airport in Vietnam, I that's exactly how I felt. Like I was just dead, or just dead exhausted. Um, so a couple of tips were in there, but that was my experience. I wouldn't recommend it, and um, I I promised that I was gonna go back next year because uh my wife's brother is going to get married next year. And I told him that we'd try our best to be there, but not excited for that next year trip. So
Nice. So basically, a little bit of planning with luggage, maybe a test run of being able to carry everything. Uh,
I think if you can
and
just minimize what you need to actually carry on and put everything in your check-in bag.
Yeah.
And just kind of remember that you're not going to have your strollers for about 20 minutes before you board.
Gotcha.
But it's really more of concern for me and younger dads than you now,
Yeah.
because you don't have to particularly worry about like a little kid running around and like you calling him not coming back, him trying to
Yeah.
board before everybody else. So,
Yeah.
um, I think if we had um we tried to bring a carrier for Cammy. It didn't really fit well for her, so we ended up not using it. So we had a carrier. And
Like a
then
carrier, like where you can put her on
on
your
her
chest,
chest,
or
yeah.
like I gotcha.
And then I think if we were gonna do it again, I'd probably get one of those. I shouldn't say a leash, but like
A tether.
a harness for Jace. That might have been a little bit easier. Um, but I think a little bit more testing, like, oh, how does it work if we don't have strollers, kind of thing.
I
But yeah,
like it.
that was rough. I think if I was gonna say, if you're gonna ask me if I would go again like that, I would not. That was, or just have somebody to help, maybe one or two people going there. I think two people going there would have helped a lot. When we came back, we had less stuff, so it was a little bit easier.
Gotcha. Yeah. So for me, it's interesting because I'm obviously at a different point. Um, so my kids are 12, 11, and 8. One's gonna be my oldest gonna be 13 soon. But we've been doing the Mexico trick every other year since I think Braden, my oldest, was probably 7 or 8. Um, and we've just been doing it, and we've never like having the kids be older. So if Braden was 8, Bella was probably 7, and Sky was, 3, or well, the first time we took Sky was 2 because we went one time where we just took just her. And for us, it's always been depending on the airport you choose for what we've done. Some of them security is just easier to get through, and just kind of pre-planning that and having activities for a kid is always important. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck on your phone or they're going to want to run. That's important even now for us. The biggest difference, like this year for us, is since we're going with so much family. We have some older family that needs help, and it's the kids giving them that responsibility of like, hey, you got to carry grandma's, baggage or whatever they need is really helpful because um, it gives them something to look forward to and feel helpful, and gives them a job, which keeps them busy. The other option for them is homework, um, or extra reading, whatever it is. But giving, as your kids get older, giving them a task, I find helps keep them either contained to a local space or contained into like an activity that's not going to drive you crazy. Um, since my two older ones are in middle school, they just happen to have a lot of homework. Um,
So
so
that's
I,
what you mean by activity?
yeah, so like an activity where it's like, hey, like when we're on the plane, like we're either going to watch a movie together or you're going to do this, or like if we're just waiting for the plane, like, hey, like let's get some homework done. But having them like locked into something. um I am a little paranoid, so I don't ever let my kids go anywhere individually when we're out and about, for safety. So like if they want to walk a loop, I'll generally trust them, but it's all three of them going together. um just kind of like traveling in their own little pack. um but then I always time cap them. So if they're ever doing something, I like, hey, like if you want to do a loop, you have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is, depending on what it is. That way, kind of always can keep track of them. Um, and so those are some of the stuff that I've learned over time to give them. The disadvantage to homework is they will outwork the class. Always when they get back, they're always ahead because they'll just do extra homework because they're bored. On the plane, you can only watch one or two movies, and then they just don't have it. Um, I do think that fitness is helpful. I think fitness is helpful in everything. So when they were really little, if kind of like you were talking about, I would pack bags differently. That way I could wear one on my back, and then I'd have one that I could carry on my front. And then I always had a like even when my kids were real little, we had little bags with wheels so that they could drag it, and it would give them something to do. So you could hold their hand and they're dragging a fraction of what their stuff is, but then it gives them something to really focus on. Hey, I'm doing a good job and I'm helping. And that's kind of built over time where even with all of my kids are pretty helpful. My oldest is the strongest. Um, so he'll just do the most. Like he's just willing to step up and do more. Which then obviously motivates his sisters because sometimes it's a little bit of competition so that they can all be very organized and be helpful. And we always go with other family, so that's actually a really good tip. Because every time we go to Mexico, it's minimally with uh, my in-laws and generally like another like a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law or somebody. So if we ever need help, having a group to kind of give kids something to do is exceptionally helpful. Um, because traveling is stressful, and depending on you know if you got somebody else there, sometimes they just want to walk and they'll just if you have a kid that's a runner, Sky was like that. It was just nice to have somebody that would just walk 5 minutes up and then 5 minutes back with her, and then eventually she would just get tired out. Even now, like even with activities and stuff, they want to explore. Like kids are kids. So having somebody else that's kind of willing to walk with them, grandma, grandpa, whatever, gives them a little bit of freedom to be out, but they're not always underfoot for you. So those are some of the fun ones that I have found to make travel less painful. But again, I've never done an international flight like you have with little kids. Um,
Yeah, you were
I,
just reminding me when you're talking about Sky. Um, Chase isn't particularly at an age where he can go off with someone. He when we were in Vietnam, it was either uh he was glued to his mom or glued to me. So he we don't exactly know how he behaved when we both weren't there. When we were like leaving with his grandma or anything like that. But we left him when Kemi was born with his aunt. Um, and it seemed like he was a lot more well behaved when we weren't around. So I think we're probably the next step is kind of teaching him because he isn't too responsive to uh commands or anything yet. So
he's still real little.
yeah, so he wouldn't know how to do uh like pulling a bag. He'd probably pull it for like a minute and then just push it to someone else, like a stranger,
Yeah.
and then we have to go grab it. So not quite there yet, but like I think that's a little bit of him being a pandemic baby. So I was just writing down that we the plan is once I get kind of stuff situated since being back a couple weeks to get him into a swim class to get him more exposure to more kids and stuff like that.
That's actually interesting that you bring that up because, like, for me, all of my kids went to daycare, um, so they're kind of just exposed differently to different,
Hmm.
like I don't even know if it's
When
necessarily
did you start
leadership
them all?
styles. I started them all pretty young, because like my first two I had when I was quite a bit younger. So I think they were 3 months. Braden started at 3 months. That's when we ran out of time for paternity. Maybe it was no, it was four. Yeah, it was like between 3 and 4 months. Because his mother took all the time she could have off, and then when she went back to work, I took time off. So I took half of my time off right when he was born, and then I took time off immediately, like as soon as his mother. Like I did this for all of my kids. When mom went back, I took time off as well to help them acclimate to being in a daycare so that I could be there with them a little bit, get a little bit of exposure, and then mom didn't have to be like crazy worried and have all
What
that stress of
did mom have what is it 6 months?
I think it's 12 weeks.
12 weeks. So is it right at birth and then 3 months later?
Yep, pretty much. So I split my time like that. But that also took some of the stress off of, mom, so to speak, because then dad's there. Um, so they started real early. Same thing with, all three of them were the same. And I think Belle, my middle, got didn't go to daycare right away because my stepdad watched her and Braden for like 3 to 6 months. So she got some just like time with a grandparent, which was always good. But then as they got older, they were in either, after school programs or daycare programs, whatever it was. So they got exposed to a lot of different people at a lot of different times to, you know, learn how to interact with different adults,
Yeah.
um, which I think is valuable. And in the pandemic, as you said, like there's nobody, like,
Yeah, we're still
yeah,
adjusting. I think with the announcement of AmFam going back to the office for a couple of days a week, we're figuring out our options still with Cami. I think if anything, it might just if we had to come down to a choice right now immediately, Jace would probably go, Cami would still stay home. But I don't know how how long because I mean the thing that kind of flipped it on its head when AmFam announced it is um it, it was a situation where we thought it was long term, and then it changed and I had a couple kids. Um, if daycare comes into the mix,
it's a huge
that's
expense.
yeah, it's an expense. It's one you have to we have to talk about salary or I mean how exactly do I cover this? So it's just not, oh, I have to pay for more gas. It's a whole other big expense that people debate about the other spouse going to work or having the kids stay at home. So it's just that's what we're kind of figuring out right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. My kids had to do daycare, but at this point, for them, all my kids are in school, so it's not as big a deal. It's more like I just have to make sure that I'm home when they get off the bus, and I have to be able to get them onto the bus. Um, and for me, like my kids all do activities now, so it's also kind of trying to work that in, so you'll get exposed to that as they get a little bit older. But
Yeah.
the hybrid office scenario is throwing a wrench in some stuff, but it is what it is.
All right, Brian, we're coming down to the end. Any last thoughts?
I think the interesting kind of thing that you brought up that is what I find interesting is for kids, I always find that they are the naughtiest for parents, and I think that's like with my kids, like it's when they're the most lippy or whatever, and I think it's they just feel completely safe. So for you with your little one when he's kind of being a handful, I think it's because he's obviously comfortable with you and doing versus when with a grandparent, it's they're a little more cautious, right? They're not 100% sure. They don't know what the discipline structure is. They don't have that unconditional, kind of love. So there's a little bit of fear there. Um, so yes, I wouldn't be surprised as you kind of put them with other people if the behavior that you experience is starkly different than what other people are experiencing. Like even at daycare and schools and stuff, sometimes you'll go in and get that feedback where you're like, are we talking about the same kid? Like this kid right here? Like, um, because yeah, they'll be, very different. So it's kind of like they put that mask on to please people so that they can, interact in ways that they need. So
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to see how you experience that with, kind of coming into it.
Well, uh, for me, I don't I don't necessarily consider him a handful. I actually think the way he behaves is actually pretty typical in my mind.
Nice.
Um, for me, like he goes w w around and kind of explores everything in a new spot, like, and I think that's just kind of a sign of his intelligence. And him just always running, like that's
He's a
something
kid.
that I expect a kid to do, and it's not something that I say, oh, he's more than I can handle. The only thing is I just worry. if he just runs off somewhere. But if anything, I enjoy that he runs around um, and there's actually a way to actually keep him still from moment to moment. But obviously we don't try to always have a phone stuck in front of him or TV stuck in front of him. But
Yeah.
um, as far as we're concerned, I think he learns and for the most part he responds to us when I mean, try to discipline him or try to teach him something, as much as a 2-year-old can. So uh, it's funny. I think I don't know if I always thought that way, but I think I have. It was funny right before we left Vietnam. Yin saw a fortune teller. She often sees fortune tellers. But one thing that kind of I remembered that she told me was that Jace is compared to Cammy. Jace is the one that um, is a little bit more calm and is one that responds a little bit more to uh, discipline and lessons and stuff like that. Whereas Cammy is the one that is kind of one that may not listen as much, and she'll kind of be a little bit more hard-headed than Jace. So we will see. I think um, her personality's changing a little bit, and she used to be like you talk to her a little bit and she'll smile and laugh, whereas now she'll do the half the time, or other times she'll kind of scream. So we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, I'll be curious, because my oldest is a boy, as is yours. Um, I think boys, in my experience, and I've had other people disagree with this, my boy specifically is easy. Like and again, he's a weird one, and we can get into that in a later podcast. But I find the girls to be a little more difficult. They're just none of my kids are naughty. Like for the most, I mean, every kid's naughty, but for the most part, like they're pretty well behaved. Um, they're mouthy. Like, but
Mhm.
again, that's I know who their dad is, so I kind of get what I get. Um, but it's definitely interesting that I find that the girls have been more challenging than my son by a decent margin. With the exception of when my girls were babies. As babies, the girls were very easy.
Mhm.
Um, and my son was a terrorist as a baby. Like he didn't sleep. I kid you not. Like he did not sleep a full night for 18 months. It was brutal.
I think that's kind of what we're coming up on. I don't know if Jace was as bad as your oldest or Braden. I think he's still okay. I think it was tough because we always listened probably a little bit too much to doctors and other people. We probably kept him kind of wrapped up like his arms when he was little, a little bit too long. And then we had to like release his arms and like then he'd have trouble sleeping. Um, because you know how they wrap babies and stuff like that.
Yeah, swaddle him.
So it took a while for him to actually sleep normally with his arms out and stuff like that. Whereas Cammy, we didn't do a whole lot of swaddling. Um, so I think I would say as of right now, Cammy is probably the easier baby than Jace was. So we might probably have the same situation.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Brian. It was a good chat, and I'll see you next time.
All right. See ya.
See ya.